Hello, America. I'm Mark Levin. This is Life, Liberty, and Levin. We have a great guest, Steve Scalise. How are you, sir?
Mark, I'm doing great. Good to be with you.
Majority whip, soon to be minority whip, unfortunately. I want to cover two areas with you. One is obviously what happened to you. The American people are intensely interested in this and really united around you when you were almost mortally wounded. And also some policy questions. What happened in the Republican Congress, in the House, what's going to happen in the Democrat House, and how, being in the minority, how you think you're going to deal with it. But first, you have a new book in Back in the Game, One Gunman, Countless Heroes in the Fight for My Life. We know the basic story, but let me ask you a question. This guy fires off a round. Bullets how big?
.762 caliber.
A big bullet.
Big bullet.
Okay. You're hit. Walk us through that, the moment you were hit, what you thought, if you felt it, what was going through your mind, were you conscious and so forth?
Well, initially I was stunned because we're on a baseball field. You're not thinking about gunfire. But as soon as I was hit, I went down and my legs gave out and I could hear more gunfire. So I knew what was going on, but you're still trying to process everything. And so the first thing I'm thinking, I never saw the shooter, but I could hear where the fire was coming from. It was around third base and I'm playing second. So I start just crawling away. I start crawling to the outfield to get away from.
Are you in pain then?
The gunfire. I'm in almost like a numbness, and I'm not feeling the true pain that I probably should have felt because knowing what that bullet did, the massive internal damage, I didn't quite feel all of that. I'm just kind of in a numbness trying to get away. So I crawled probably about 20 feet, and then my arms gave out. In fact, in the book we have a picture of a blood trail that somebody took that shows you how far I crawled before ultimately my arms gave out. And then at that moment, I just started to pray. First thing that came to mind, I said, I'm just going to pray and put it in God's hands. And believe me, God performed miracles that day, but he gave me an unbelievable sense of calm. Once I started praying, it was almost like everything around me just kind of went into a background noise, and I'm just in a one-on-one conversation with God at that point.
You found peace?
True peace.
How did you get from the baseball field to the transport to get you to the hospital, and were you conscious during most of that?
Well, right after the shooter went down, and to me it seemed like an hour. It was maybe a matter of 7 minutes that the whole shootout happened. And as soon as the shooter went down, Brad Wenstrup, a colleague of mine from Ohio, and he's a doctor, but he's also he was a combat surgeon in Iraq. And he was watching me the whole time, and he immediately came over and looked at where the damage was, put a tourniquet on to stop the bleeding. And my trauma surgeon told me later I wouldn't have made it to the hospital if not for that, for what Brad did. And then there was a few minutes of everybody, colleagues of mine, kind of coming around tending to me. And then an ambulance finally got there, and they transferred me initially to an ambulance. That's kind of when I started to go out, to kind of fade out. And then at some point, the ambulance is leaving, sees a helicopter coming, and it's 7:30 in the morning in Northern Virginia. As you know, I would have never made it to George Washington Hospital, which is where they were going to take me. I would have bled out. So then they go to where the helicopter is landing on the ball field, and sure enough, the helicopter had come to transport me away, and they put me on that helicopter, and 4 minutes later, I'm in the emergency room over at MedStar Hospital. And again, I kind of was out and unconscious by the time I got on the helicopter, but I was starting to fade prior to that, wondering, am I even going to make it?
How many operations have you gone through?
Gone through nine different major surgeries. Luckily, all of them are over and successful at putting everything back together. But it was a lot. Initially just the going in to try to figure out, opened me up to try to figure out where all the damage was, and I had massive internal bleeding. I actually showed up at the hospital with a 0 blood pressure, which rarely does anybody make it out from that. And then they had to put about 20 pints of blood in me, and the human body takes about 9 pints of blood. So I had lost a lot of blood, and then even as they were putting more in, I had so many arteries that were shredded. So they finally sewed up each one individually and got me to a point where they could close me up again. And then over the next few months had to put me back together.
What is the first thing you remember when you did come to? Do you remember that?
Yeah, when I came to it, it was 3 days later. I didn't know. For all I knew, it was maybe a few hours later. And I had no idea how bad off I was. I remember when I came to that I was shot. And the first thing I did was ask for my wife. And Jennifer had, of course, she had flown in that night, but she was there, and so she sees me, and I've got tubes in my throat, and I've got all kind of other things hooked up to me, so I couldn't even talk. And so I'm trying to make some verbal signals to her, and luckily she knew what I was motioning. And initially what I wanted to find out was Dave and Crystal, my two Capitol Police Security Detail officers that were there with me that morning. I knew both of them were shot in the shootout. And you talk about real heroes, and look, Mark, I identify in the book a lot of miracles that happened, but also the heroes that played a role in saving me, and no bigger heroes than Dave Bailey and Crystal Griner, who both risked their life, were shot at during the shootout, and kept going after the shooter until they took him down. And I didn't know if they made it, and because I knew they were hit. And when Jennifer told me they were both okay, it was just a huge sense of relief.
Were you a man of faith before, as well as after?
Yeah, I didn't express it a lot. Every night when I go to sleep, I always had a habit of praying to God. I just talk to him about the things that happened, thank him for the things that happened that were good. There might be something you want or something you're trying to achieve down the road, and so I'd pray for those things, but I'd also try to remember to pray and thank him for the things that he did that were good that day. And it's always a constant reminder that every day in life something good happens and bad happens. Don't just focus on the negative. And so I'd always say a quiet, private prayer. But I said some real heady prayers that day on the ball field, and he delivered.
Do you still go through a lot of physical therapy, I imagine?
I do. I still go a few days a week. It's primarily to build up the strength in my left leg. The bullet went in here and did a lot of internal damage, but especially the nerves and muscles on the left side of my leg, took the most damage. And so I'm still building those muscles back. I'm down to one crutch. I initially was on a scooter to get around, and then was able to go on to two crutches, and built enough strength up to go down now to one crutch. And my next goal is to finally be able to walk again without crutches.
Do you feel like you have a renewed purpose because you are a man who shouldn't even be here? I mean, a bullet that big, cutting through your body like that into all those organs, in a place where it's very difficult to get to a hospital. Do you feel like you have a renewed purpose, a renewed life?
I know how close I was, Mark, to not being here. My trauma surgeon, about 2 months after the shooting, I was still in the hospital, and well enough to where I was on the road to recovery, but still had a lot of damage. And I asked him just how bad it was, and he walked me through, and he said, really, that first night, he said there were at least 2 different times that first night where he wasn't sure I was going to make it. So I know I'm lucky to be alive. If anything, it puts a real renewed focus on what's important in life. All of us have things that we do every day, and you're following somebody else's schedule on certain things, and then there's the things you really want to do. And I've tried to remove some of the clutter in my life and focus on the things that really matter to me, which is, my faith and my family and the things I love doing. And I love this job. I love being able to serve and fight for them.
I mean, you were almost assassinated.
Yeah.
You were a political target. You were on a list. This killer, would-be killer, was a radical. He came to Washington with his list. He came here to shoot all you guys. And yet, when you were shot, the nation, I'm sure you know now, everybody was stunned. And then a week goes by, 2 weeks go by, a year goes by, and we're at it again, at each other's throats. Things are said about the president. Things are said that you really wonder with the tone. I'm not saying aggressive political debate, but when you're calling somebody Hitler and a racist and Nazis and stuff like that, isn't that playing with fire?
Yeah, I do think that rhetoric needs to come down, and where we all ought to be able to disagree with each other, and where we have a political debate, you ought to fight for the things you believe in because they're critically important. You ought to respect that somebody else that's having a different viewpoint, it doesn't mean that they're evil or that they have ulterior motives. It's just maybe they just see the world differently. But you shouldn't try to make those differences personal. And I do think we've gotten to a point where it's definitely ratcheted up to a point where I think we need to try to calm it down. And you know,
it seems to me when somebody calls somebody Hitler, well, we know what Hitler was, or a racist. In other words, it's not, you know, I disagree with this guy, as you point out, this guy, he's way too to the right or something. But you're using characterizations that you intend to be provocative after this assassination attempt on you, that this is utterly and completely irresponsible to me. And I'm just telling you, Congressman, I turn on the TV, I see this all the time. You see it too, right?
Yeah, you know, and I mean, like you said, I mean, when you're using something that radioactive, I mean, Hitler is a man who literally killed millions of Jews based on the fact that he wanted to annihilate them all from the face of the earth. I mean, that is as pure of evil as you can get, and nobody should be compared to him. But at the same time, you know, you see that they almost seem to try to desensitize it, as if you disagree, it's okay to call somebody something that evil these days. And we all ought to be standing up against that and saying, hold on a second, look, if we disagree, let's at least be honest about why we disagree and try to win the argument. You know, Margaret Thatcher said, you know, first win the debate, then win the vote, which means if you're losing the debate, you don't go and threaten the other person physically or try to call them a racist or a Nazi. You try to maybe make a better argument. And these days it almost seems like the cop-out is just go say something so vitriolic that you try to shut down the debate. And you're seeing this on a lot of college campuses too, where they literally don't want conservative viewpoints. If you're, you know, try going to Berkeley as a conservative. I mean, is that really what you're supposed to be about? Shouldn't you try to say, look, go educate yourself. Let's hear all viewpoints and have enough confidence in your argument that you're going to win the day. But if you're so afraid of the other side's argument that you want to call them names to the point where you shut them down, I think you've already lost.
Did Bernie Sanders ever call you or ever bump into you in the Capitol building, give you a pat on the shoulder or anything like that?
He reached out to my office, and I think we may have spoken in those kind of first few days when I was in a fog, but okay. He did reach out.
Okay. So you guys are going to...
And I don't hold him or
no, of course not.
Anything responsible, because, you know, clearly what this guy did was deranged, and, you know, there's no justification for it.
Let me ask you this. You're going to be in the minority now. But let me talk a little bit about when, like now, you're in the majority, but it's a lame duck session. It's a lame duck session, but things can still get done, right?
Yeah.
Are they going to get done? The border wall.
We're in a battle right now over proper funding of the border wall. I was just in a meeting with President Trump a few days ago. Clearly, this has been a big priority of his. It's a big priority of mine. I'd like to see us get this done, and we're in a fight with the other side. But at the same time, when you look at this caravan coming across, you have in this caravan of people who have said, we're going to ignore your laws and just storm across the border. There are over 600 already known criminal convicts in the caravan. When you look at some of the things they do to try to use women as human shields, again, it shows you what kind of people are really responsible for the caravan. But it's incredibly important that we secure our border. And I applaud President Trump for being willing to do it because, look, every single day, this doesn't get mainstream media coverage, and it should. Every single day in this country, at least 10 known terrorists are captured trying to cross into America through our border. Why are we trying to secure the border? To keep America safe. And it's not that everybody that comes here wants to seek the American dream. There's a legal way to do that. And President Trump has said, even if you want to seek asylum, seek it the legal way. But if you're trying to break our laws and come over here when the president's saying we're going to secure the border, there's a reason. He's fighting to keep this country safe because there really are bad people that try to come here.
When we come back, I'm going to ask you two follow-ups on that. Number one, if there are 10 terrorists captured every day, then why wouldn't the Democrat Party want to do more to help secure that southern border? And number two, is the problem only the Democrats, or are there problems among the Republicans, too, to get this sort of thing done when we come back? Ladies and gentlemen, don't forget, most weeknights you can watch me on Levin TV. Levin TV. Go to crtv.com/Mark to sign up, crtv.com/Mark, or give us a call at 844-LEVIN-TV, 844-LEVIN-TV.